I used to think my marriage was solid in the way most people define stability. No screaming fights, no dramatic breakups, no obvious cracks. We had been together for 11 years, married for 8. We owned a modest house, shared bills, shared plans, shared a future that felt predictable and safe. My wife worked in a corporate office downtown, a mid-level position, nothing glamorous, but she was proud of it. She liked structure, liked feeling important, liked being needed. I admired that about her. I worked remotely most days, which meant I was home more often, managing the quiet parts of our life while she dealt with the outside world. If I'm honest, I think that's where things started to shift. She began staying later at the office. At first, it made sense. End-of-quarter deadlines, staff shortages, internal audits. She complained about how exhausted she was, how understaffed the building had become. I listened. I supported her. I never questioned it. What I didn't realize was how quickly late nights became routine. Her phone habits changed next. She used to leave it lying around, on the counter, on the couch, charging overnight on the nightstand. Now it was always on her. Screen faced down, notifications muted. When messages came through, she'd glance at them quickly and slide the phone away. I noticed. I just didn't confront it. I told myself I didn't want to be that husband, the suspicious one, the insecure one. I trusted her. At least I thought I did. She started talking about work differently too. Not about projects or coworkers, but about the building itself. How dirty it was. How management didn't care. How the cleaning staff were the only ones who actually noticed anything. One name came up more than once. At first, it felt insignificant. Just a guy who worked nights, kept the floors clean, said hello when she stayed late. She mentioned how polite he was, how he always asked if she was okay when she worked past regular hours. I didn't even register the name properly. He was just background noise. Until he wasn't. One evening, she came home later than usual, close to midnight. She looked wired, not tired. She talked too fast, laughed too easily. She said the office had been nearly empty except for security and cleaning staff. She mentioned him again, how he'd helped her carry boxes, how they'd talked while the floors dried. I remember feeling something tighten in my chest. Not jealousy, unease. I ignored it. Over the next few weeks, her late nights became more frequent. Sometimes she wouldn't come home at all until morning, claiming she'd fallen asleep in the break room. She stopped inviting me to office events, stopped talking about future plans. Conversations became functional. Logistics, schedules, groceries. We were living together, but not connecting. One weekend, I offered to bring her dinner at the office. I thought it would be a nice gesture. She hesitated before agreeing, which should have been my first real warning. When I arrived, the building was mostly dark. Security let me up after calling her desk. As I walked down the hallway, I noticed how quiet everything felt. Too quiet for a normal work night. Her office door was closed. I knocked. No answer. I knocked again, harder this time. I heard movement inside, chairs shifting, a low voice that wasn't hers. The door opened slowly. She looked startled, genuinely startled, like someone caught between thoughts. She stepped out quickly, blocking my view inside the office. She smiled too wide and asked what I was doing there. That was the moment I knew. I didn't see him yet. I didn't need to. The tension in her body, the way her hands shook, the way she wouldn't let me past her, it told me everything. She laughed it off, said a cleaner was inside finishing up, said it was embarrassing that I'd come by unannounced. She kissed my cheek and thanked me for the food, but insisted I go home. I went and hated myself for it. That night, I didn't sleep. Every instinct I'd suppressed for months was screaming now. Patterns lined up. Late nights, secrecy, emotional distance. The casual way she'd spoken about him before, as if testing whether his presence registered with me. The next morning, I checked our phone records. The number appeared dozens of times. Late-night calls, long ones, almost always after her regular work hours. I confronted her calmly. No yelling, no accusations. I showed her the call logs and asked her to explain. She cried. Not the kind of crying that comes from guilt, the kind that comes from panic. She said he was just someone who listened, that she felt invisible at home, that nothing physical had happened, that I was misunderstanding everything. She lied easily. Too easily. I didn't argue. I told her I needed time to think. I went for a drive and sat in a parking lot for hours, staring at nothing, realizing that my marriage had quietly slipped out of my control without me noticing. 2 days later, I came home early. Her car was in the driveway. She wasn't supposed to be home. I parked a little farther down the street than usual, not because I was trying to hide, but because something in my body told me to slow down. The house looked normal from the outside. Curtains drawn, lights on, nothing alarming. And yet my chest felt tight, like I was about to walk into bad news I already knew. When I opened the front door, I heard voices, her voice first, low, casual, then a man's voice I didn't recognize, deeper, unfamiliar, too comfortable. I stood there longer than I want to admit, keys still in my hand, listening. I wasn't hoping to hear something specific. I think I was hoping to be wrong. I wasn't. They were in the kitchen. I could hear drawers opening, the clink of glass, the sound of someone laughing softly. It sounded intimate in the worst way, not loud or careless, but relaxed, like two people who felt safe. I stepped forward, and the sound of my shoes on the floor gave me away. Everything stopped. When I walked into the kitchen, they both turned to look at me. My wife's face went pale instantly. The man froze, one hand still resting on the counter. He was wearing a maintenance uniform, not the same one I'd seen in my mind, but close enough. Cleaning staff, janitorial company logo on the chest, gloves tucked into his back pocket. The cleaner. He looked just as shocked to see me as I felt seeing him. Maybe more. Like he'd never imagined this version of reality intersecting with his. My wife spoke first. She laughed nervously and said my name like it was a question. "What are you doing home?" she asked. That question told me everything. Not, "You're early," not, "Is everything okay?" Just confusion that I wasn't where I was supposed to be. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I just asked her who he was. She hesitated for a fraction of a second too long. Then she said he was helping her with something from work, that he needed to drop off some documents, that it wasn't what it looked like. I looked at him. He wouldn't meet my eyes. I asked him directly why he was in my house. He opened his mouth, closed it, then said quietly that he thought no one else lived there, that he was told it was fine to stop by, that he was sorry. Sorry. That word echoed in my head. I told him to leave. He didn't argue. He didn't defend himself. He grabbed his jacket and walked out without another word, head down, shoulders tight. The door closed behind him, and the house felt impossibly quiet. That's when my wife exploded. She accused me of embarrassing her, of making a scene, of humiliating her in front of someone who meant nothing. She cried, paced, yelled, blamed me for coming home early without warning. She said I was invading her privacy, that I didn't trust her, that I'd been emotionally distant for years. It was like listening to a script she'd rehearsed. I asked her how long it had been going on. She avoided the question. I asked her if it was physical. She said it wasn't supposed to happen. That was answer enough. I packed a bag that night. She followed me from room to room, switching tactics every few minutes. Apologies turned into anger. Anger turned into bargaining. She promised therapy, promised transparency, promised it was over. I told her I didn't believe her. That hurt her more than anything else I said. I went to stay with a friend. I slept on his couch and stared at the ceiling until morning. Every memory of our marriage replayed itself in a new light. Conversations I'd brushed off, arguments that never resolved, moments where she'd pulled away and I'd blamed myself. The next day, she texted nonstop. Long messages, short messages, missed calls, voice notes full of tears. She said she felt invisible, that the cleaner made her feel seen, that it started as conversation during late nights when the office was empty, that he listened when she complained. That one thing led to another. She said she never meant to hurt me. I stopped reading after that. Over the next week, more details surfaced whether I wanted them or not. The affair had gone on for months. It wasn't spontaneous. It wasn't accidental. They met regularly after hours, sometimes at the office, sometimes in his car, sometimes, apparently, in my house. I felt sick every time I thought about it. I met with a lawyer. That's when reality became unavoidable. Divorce wasn't a dramatic decision anymore. It was a practical one. Asset division, living arrangements, timelines. I felt detached listening to it all, like it was someone else's life being discussed. When I told her I'd filed, she accused me of giving up too easily. I didn't argue. She tried to spin the story to friends and family. She said I was cold, that I worked too much, that I neglected her emotionally. Some people believed her. Some stayed neutral. A few quietly reached out to tell me they suspected something had been wrong for a long time. I learned who actually knew me. She lost her job eventually, not directly because of the affair, but because of policy violations, workplace relationships, after-hours access, boundaries crossed, consequences she hadn't expected. She blamed me for that too. The divorce took almost a year. It was exhausting in ways I hadn't anticipated. Not because I wanted her back, but because untangling a life is harder than building one. Every document, every signature, every negotiation felt like reopening a wound. When it was finally over, I felt empty, but lighter. I moved into a small apartment. I bought new furniture. I slept better than I had in years. The silence didn't feel lonely. It felt clean. I thought about her less and less. About him almost never. What stayed with me was the lesson. I learned that betrayal rarely arrives loudly. It slips in through small compromises, late nights explained away, discomfort ignored, trust given to someone who stops respecting it. I learned that love isn't about enduring disrespect, and that walking away isn't failure when staying costs you your dignity. My life now isn't extraordinary. It's calm, honest, grounded. I don't ignore my instincts anymore. I don't explain away red flags. I don't confuse attention with connection. And if I could give one piece of advice to the person I used to be, it would be this. Pay attention to what feels wrong, especially when you're being told it's nothing. That awareness would have saved me months of denial. But leaving saved me my future. After everything settled, I expected some kind of emotional collapse to catch up with me. People talk about delayed reactions, about grief hitting you out of nowhere. Maybe it did, just not in the way I imagined. What I felt most was exhaustion. Not physical tiredness, but the kind that comes from carrying uncertainty for too long. Once the marriage ended, that weight disappeared. I didn't wake up wondering where she was, who she was talking to, or whether I was imagining things. The constant background noise in my head finally went silent. That silence was unsettling at first. I realized how much of my identity had been wrapped around maintaining the relationship, adjusting my schedule to hers, managing her moods, avoiding topics that led to tension, being careful with my words. When all of that stopped, I didn't immediately know what to do with myself, so I started small. I rebuilt routines that belonged only to me. Morning walks, cooking meals I liked instead of compromising, reading again, sleeping without my phone on the nightstand. Little things that reminded me I was allowed to exist without constantly reacting to someone else. She tried to reach out a few more times in the months that followed, sometimes apologetic, sometimes angry, sometimes pretending we could still be friends. I didn't engage, not out of cruelty, but because every interaction pulled me backward. Healing required distance. One message stuck with me, though. She said, "I never thought you'd actually leave." I read that sentence over and over. It explained more than any apology ever could. She hadn't cheated because she didn't love me. She cheated because she didn't believe there would be consequences, because my patience had taught her that I would absorb discomfort quietly. That realization hurt, but it also freed me from self-blame. I stopped asking what I lacked. I started asking why I accepted less than I deserved. As time passed, the story stopped being something I rehearsed in my head. It became something I could think about without emotional spikes. Friends stopped checking in as often. Life moved forward, the way it always does. I dated again eventually. Slowly. Carefully. Not to replace what I'd lost, but to understand myself better. I paid attention to how it felt to be around someone new, whether I felt relaxed or on edge, whether I felt heard or managed. I learned to leave early when something didn't sit right, instead of waiting for proof that justified my discomfort. That was new for me. I no longer needed dramatic endings to validate my choices. I trusted my internal signals. I trusted patterns over promises. Occasionally, I'd run into people who knew my ex. They'd offer updates I didn't ask for. Where she was working now, who she was seeing, how she was doing better. I listened politely and felt nothing. Not anger, not satisfaction, just distance. That's when I knew I was truly done. The version of myself who stayed too long wasn't weak. He was hopeful. He believed in commitment. He believed people meant what they said. I don't resent that version of me. I just don't live that way anymore. If there's one thing this experience taught me, it's that betrayal doesn't start with cheating. It starts when someone stops respecting the relationship and you start respecting their excuses. Walking away didn't make my life perfect, but it made it honest. And honesty, I've learned, is the only foundation that lasts. I don't tell this story for revenge. I tell it because somewhere out there is someone ignoring that same quiet discomfort I ignored. Someone explaining away late nights, secrecy, emotional distance. Someone afraid that leaving means failing. It doesn't. Sometimes leaving is the first decision you make that actually honors who you are. And that's not the end of a life. That's the beginning of one you don't have to apologize for. Eventually, even the need to tell the story faded. That surprised me the most. For a long time, the story had felt important, like proof. Proof that I wasn't crazy. Proof that I hadn't imagined the shift, the distance, the betrayal. Telling it helped me organize what happened. Helped me understand how something that looked stable on the surface could rot quietly underneath. But one day, I realized I hadn't thought about it in weeks. Not in the car. Not before bed. Not when something went wrong at work. It simply didn't occupy space in my head anymore. What replaced it wasn't happiness in the dramatic sense. It was steadiness, confidence, a sense that I was standing on my own feet instead of bracing for impact. I trusted my reactions now. I didn't second-guess discomfort or override my instincts for the sake of harmony. That change showed up everywhere. In conversations, I spoke more directly. In relationships, I set limits early. In my own thoughts, I stopped negotiating with doubt. I didn't become colder. I became clearer. Looking back, I understand that the affair itself was only the final symptom of something that had already broken. Respect had eroded long before trust did. And once respect is gone, love becomes performative, conditional, convenient. I no longer chase closure from people who benefit from confusion. I don't need explanations that arrive too late or apologies meant to ease someone else's guilt. Closure came the moment I accepted that her choices were not a reflection of my worth. That acceptance changed how I see everything. I don't believe in perfect relationships anymore. I believe in honest ones. I believe in attention, consistency, and accountability. I believe that love should feel grounding, not destabilizing. And I believe that staying in something harmful doesn't make you loyal. It makes you unavailable to yourself. If this story resonates with you, I hope you hear this clearly. You don't need a dramatic discovery to justify leaving. You don't need to catch someone in the act. You don't need permission to protect your dignity. If you feel small, confused, or constantly second-guessing your reality just to keep the peace, that peace is already false. Walking away didn't make me bitter. It didn't harden me. It gave me the space to become someone I respect. And that's something no betrayal can ever take away. There's a strange moment that comes after healing, one no one really talks about. It's when you realize you're no longer defined by what happened to you, but by how you chose to live afterward. That moment came quietly for me. I was sitting alone one evening, doing nothing important, when it hit me that my life no longer revolved around damage control. I wasn't anticipating arguments that never came. I wasn't preparing explanations in my head. I wasn't bracing myself for disappointment. I was just living. And it felt unfamiliar in the best way. I understood then that the marriage hadn't ended when I caught her. It had ended much earlier, when honesty stopped being mutual and respect became optional. What I walked in on was just the undeniable proof my mind needed to stop protecting a version of reality that no longer existed. I don't regret loving her. I regret abandoning myself to keep that love alive. That's the difference. Today, my standards are simple. I value consistency over charm, transparency over reassurance, actions over promises. I no longer wait for people to show me who they are twice. And if something feels wrong, I don't argue with that feeling anymore. I listen. If this story serves any purpose beyond my own closure, I hope it's this. You're not weak for trusting, and you're not cruel for leaving. You're allowed to choose yourself the moment a relationship requires you to disappear to survive it. I didn't lose a marriage. I gained clarity, peace, and a life that no longer asks me to ignore myself. And that was worth everything. In the end, The story didn't need more twists or revelations. Life didn't hand me a final confrontation or a perfect apology. What it gave me instead was something quieter and far more valuable: stability without tension. I learned to recognize peace not as boredom, but as safety. There are days now when I forget how heavy everything once felt. Days when the past doesn't tap me on the shoulder at all. When it does, it no longer hurts. It simply reminds me how far I've come. I don't wonder anymore whether I did the right thing. That question lost its power the moment my life stopped revolving around doubt. I don't carry bitterness with me. I carry awareness. I know what it looks like when someone slowly steps outside a relationship while still standing inside it. I know how easy it is to mistake patience for love and silence for strength. And I know now that choosing yourself doesn't require permission. If you're reading this and feel like something in your life is quietly wrong, listen to that feeling. It's not trying to ruin what you have. It's trying to save who you are. That's the lesson I earned the hard way. And it's the one I'll never forget. There really isn't anything left to add without turning this into something it never was meant to be. My life didn't end with betrayal. It reset. The marriage is a closed chapter now, not because I forced myself to forget, but because it no longer asks anything of me. I don't carry questions. I don't carry anger. I don't carry the need to be understood by people who chose not to understand me when it mattered. What I carry is discernment. I know now that love should not make you smaller. It should not require constant forgiveness for the same wound. It should not demand silence in exchange for stability. The moment a relationship asks you to doubt your own reality, it has already crossed a line that words can't fix. I didn't walk away because I stopped loving her. I walked away because I finally started loving myself enough to stop accepting less. That's the truth of it. Simple, undramatic, final. And that's where this story truly ends.